Hello, my name's Niranjan, the host of Master of Your Crafts podcast, learning from leaders who are continuously inspired, passionate, and driven to align with their soul purpose, sharing their gifts to bring healing to others. The music is composed by Rebecca Everett. Today is episode number 139, and I had the pleasure of talking to Dr. Wise, a psychologist with over 40 years of experience practicing and teaching psychotherapy. He's an award-winning author of 4 books, including an Amazon bestseller called Hidden in Plain Sight: How Men's Fear of Women Shape Their Intimacy in Relationships. Dr. Wise lives with his wife and dog on the island in the mid-coast, Maine, and offers consultations online. Enjoy the conversation of spirituality and psychotherapy coming together in how he's mastered the craft of psychotherapy and going beyond the relationships that we often take for granted. So enjoy the conversation. Thank you. Hello and welcome to Dr. Wise.
Hi.
Nice to meet you, and thank you for taking the time for this conversation. I'm excited to get into the space of psychology, but also from your learnings and your experiences of individuals over your time of a psychotherapist, but also in the hundreds of conversations, probably thousands of conversations you've had one-on-one and with couples, but also with your writings in psychology today as well. What is it you believe about yourself, having been through the process of supporting individuals on their journey and their relationships with themselves? Has it changed your perspective of who you are today, even? And does that define who you are in comparison to your earlier days into the industry?
Well, it's an interesting question. I come from a perspective I was taught that that the work that a therapist does on him or herself is the work that you do in becoming a skilled therapist. So if you're a computer programmer, you learn programming. But for a therapist, what we work on is ourselves, with the idea being that the quality of relationships that we're able to build with other people is what is most impactful in the work. So my teacher would say that the people I work with will not be able to go any further in their work than I can go in me. So if you come to me for help and you're uncomfortable with your anger and I'm uncomfortable with my anger, I'm not going to help you very much. But so I have to be more comfortable with my own anger or my own abandonment or my own whatever that you want help with. So then all the work that I do on myself is how I become a better therapist. And the conferences and professional organizations I go to are all about working on ourselves as people.
Mm-hmm. How have you seen that shift from you consciously working on yourselves to the reflection and the nuggets of wisdoms and ahas that potentially come out of conversations during sessions with clients? Because I'm sure there's an influence that comes out of that dialogue setting.
Well, we hope there's an influence. My field goes back and forth over time as to whether or not we think therapists should be impacted by the work. But I've always believed strongly that therapists should be. Carl Jung had a beautiful quote. He said that therapy is like alchemy, and both patient and therapist should be impacted, or else there's not really a reaction going on. And so it's not desirable as a therapist to sit and listen to people's most profound and intimate truths and not be impacted. Our being impacted is part of the work. And of course, on the patient's end, to share deep and intimate truths with someone and have them not be impacted is not a good feeling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How does that change your viewpoint in your relationship with yourself? Or have you seen that shift?
Well, I mean, I think I have the world's most interesting job because I learn something in almost every session that I ever have because human beings are endlessly interesting and complex. And so I'm learning about you, I'm learning about me, I'm learning about relationships. It's not infrequent
Mhm.
for me to rush to my keyboard after a session because I'll be talking with somebody about something. I'm like, oh, I didn't think about that. That's interesting. And, I
Right.
would say probably a day doesn't go by that I don't have some idea or some learning that often ends up in an article or something I'm working on. But it also builds, you have one thing you learn in one session and then somebody else says it a little differently. You're like, oh, it's not really like I thought it was. It's more like this. And
Mhm.
so it's endlessly e- engaging and learning and expanding and
Absolutely. And I think that's possibly one of the biggest nuggets that we get to do as individuals to have that introspective space. If you choose to go there, because we know there's probably a number of billion people out there in the world who choose not to do that,
Sure.
want to stay so far away from that as possible. But for me personally, it's a very an engaging place, that introspective and
Yeah.
that
We
inward
can say they
looking.
choose not to, but I think what we're really talking about is fear because I think it is innately human. I am a member of a book group and we met last night and the topic of the conversation was basically Christopher Hitchens' book on atheism, God is not great. And people went on and on and on about all the problems with religion. And I'm like, yeah, that's all true. But what you're overlooking is sort of the innate human desire to understand and make meaning of the world, which is what religion is an expression of. And so
Mhm.
that's what therapy is an expression of. It's like,
Mhm.
well, I could just go through my life not paying much attention, but it's pretty human to want to like, well, why did the sun come up? And why does it get colder in the winter? And why does my wife not like it when I come home late
Mhm.
from work? Or,
Mhm.
these are questions that human beings, I think, are just innately interested in. And when you meet people who aren't, it's mostly because they've gotten hurt or wounded or traumatized in some way and have become scared to ask those kind of questions. But I think we were all born being pretty interested in ourselves and the world.
And it takes a lot of courage to get to the space to sit in front of somebody or be on live in person or on a Zoom call and have vulnerable conversations of old wounds that may have presented themselves through experiences and relationships or unknowing places. Exploring that is pretty courageous to do.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't disagree with you, but it really isn't that way for me. I
Mm.
mean, I think for most people that's probably true, but I have always just been interested in people in an in-depth way. I think I may have said this to you, but when I was a kid, I used to walk past people on the street, and it wasn't something I meant to do. It's just something I found myself doing. I would find myself holding my body the way they held their body and walking the way. And I think
Mm.
what I was doing was just sort of trying to understand, like, what would it feel like to
Mm.
hold your body and to walk? So I've always been not frightened, but to me, when things get more heated, I get more interested. I don't get
Right,
intimidated. I'm like, oh, okay.
right.
This is we're talking about important stuff here.
Yes.
Let's keep going.
Yes, yes. When was there a tipping point or was there a switch for you in recognition of this is the career path, this is the path that I want to take, and what was
Yeah.
that for you?
Um, I have a very unusual background. I've been a therapist since I was 17 years old. But the tipping point for me was probably my dad was a very, very unhappy man who I found out many years after he died that he had actually tried to kill himself when he was 14 years old, which I didn't know when he was alive. But he was very upset and very angry. And he had a very serious, nearly fatal heart attack. And for some reason, decided to go into therapy after that heart attack, and it was transformative. I mean, he went from an angry, violent man to a loving, incredibly generous, amazing human being, which I saw came from his therapy. I also met his therapist,
Mm.
who was a wonderful, he's, a little Viennese guy, looked and sounded just like Freud. And
Mhm.
his therapist was extremely generous with me and clearly loved my father very much. And so I had a very, very positive experience of therapy as a really transforming life experience. I mean, it completely changed my father's life, and so it changed
Right.
my life.
Yeah. And you chose to do that as a career path rather than saying, okay, I've had that experience, it's been fruitful, but maybe I want to be an accountant. Maybe I like numbers. Maybe that's
Yeah,
the
it
way that I really
wasn't
want
quite
to go.
that thoughtful. You're giving me a little more credit than I would give myself. Really, what happened is I just found it endlessly interesting. And
Mhm.
so I kept studying it. So I worked in the field and then I got a master's and then I worked in the field and then I got a PhD.
Right.
But it was all the same to me. It was all learning.
Yeah.
So I was the weird kid in my graduate school class who, when it came time to write dissertations, I thought that was like the best thing that ever happened in my, you mean like, oh, I got to spend an entire year learning about what I want to learn about and I have no other responsibilities. Like,
Yeah. Nice.
it couldn't get any better. So that
That's
was
right.
me. And
Yeah.
so it really wasn't something I thought about. I didn't have any idea what therapists did for work or what they made
Mm.
or anything like that. I just was interested and I just
Right.
had the opportunity to study. And
Yeah.
so I did.
What a gift. What a gift that you was able to follow that through and keep curbing that curiosity of people and their behavior and wanting to embody it to a certain degree, I guess.
Well, the state of Georgia made it an investment in my education. I went to Georgia State University, which is a state school, and I was able to earn my way through graduate school, seven
Mm.
years. And I had research assistantships and teaching assistantships, and I got an in-state tuition. So the state of
Nice.
Georgia was investing, and then I practiced and paid taxes in Georgia for 40 years. So it was a good
Wow.
investment on their part, and it made it affordable for me. And
Yeah.
it takes 7 years out of my life to be a student, which was quite a luxury.
Nice. Yeah. What do you feel was some of the key attributes in what you do, not only from some of the attributes that you might have learned in your earlier years as a therapist, but consistently follow through as you're in retirement and in that space of leaning into all those decades of experiences that you have
You
that put
mean,
you
go ahead, sorry.
in a space to connect you with this purpose and with the connection of supporting individuals on their inward exploration. So the attributes, the skills,
Yeah.
the character, the skill sets that you have developed for
Yeah,
yourself.
I think it's more character traits than skill sets.
Hmm.
The research in my field says that therapeutic technique accounts for about 15% of the effectiveness of therapy. So I don't think it has a lot to do with techniques or skills. I think it has much more to do with character and who you are as a person. And I think it's exactly what we've been talking about. You can't fake being interested in people.
Right.
So you have to really be interested in people in a curious and respectful rather than judgmental
Hmm.
way.
Hmm.
And so I supervise a lot of therapists, and
Right.
when I meet a new therapist who wants to work with me, if they have that, but they don't have a lot of the techniques and stuff, I'm like, I'm not worried about you. I can teach you that. I can't
Right.
teach you this. If you don't have this core, I don't know how to teach that to somebody. But if you are genuinely interested in people and being engaged with them in a deep way, then the rest is teachable.
Hmm. Hmm. It's interesting that the natural curiosity possibly can't be taught, but I wonder if it can. I wonder if it can from this vantage point of the skill sets of various industries and professions, the sales profession, um, other people engaging professions, the healthcare industry, where there is that sense of deeper curiosity and deeper
Yeah.
exploration in those kind of dialogues and narratives back, conversations back and forth. So I wonder, is it in your perspective of mentoring and supporting other people on their journey, you choose not to
I like where
tell
you're
them?
going with this, and what I would say it a little differently, I would say it can be encouraged or disencouraged.
Okay.
I don't know if it can be taught. I think it
Okay.
kind of has to be in you, but it certainly can be encouraged or discouraged. I mean, I think one of the problems in medicine is that even though we know that that is an important part of the effectiveness of the doctor-patient relationship,
Mhm.
those characteristics tend to be discouraged in medicine
Right.
now because it's become so technical. There was an article in the New York Times in the last year or so that doctors don't know how to use a stethoscope anymore. They don't ever examine patients.
Wow.
They just give tests and read results. And so, unfortunately, medicine is discouraging those
Hmm.
characteristics. And
Hmm.
sadly, so is psychology, except for some places. But
Right.
so, and I think this is happening all over us that it's becoming less and less personal and more teaching is probably the same way. But we know what makes an effective teacher. An effective teacher is someone who's interested in his students.
Yes.
So it's a
Yes.
question of, in all of these professions, encouraging those qualities and helping people to believe that that is important and that having that to offer matters.
Ultimately, we know that human connection and that encouragement and that nurturing of relationship and qualities, innate qualities that we all have, is the fundamental piece of enhancing an individual in
Yes.
whatever direction of life they choose to be in. How have you seen that shift over your career in this space of psychology from perhaps your mentors to what you see other therapists doing in your industry? Have you seen that change?
Well, I think unfortunately the values that you and I are talking about are seen as less valuable.
Hmm.
I think training programs are getting more mechanistic, which is odd because therapists are the ones who did all the research saying that technique is not really an important part of therapy. So I don't understand why we become obsessed with teaching technique in graduate school when we know that that's not what's most effective. We don't
Mm.
really take our own research seriously.
Mm.
The field as a whole is tending to move towards more mechanized, technique-oriented approaches. But I think this always happens. And then what happens is the data says that the longer people, the farther away they are from school, the less like that they practice. So they
Right.
get trained in a certain way in school, but then they get out in the real world and they talk with people and they find that's not really what's helpful. And they let their patients teach them
Yes.
what is more helpful. And so they become more the kind of therapist we're talking about over time through their experience working in the field.
Right. So then this begs another question out of curiosity for myself is if that's the case and that's the way that the world is shifting, especially the institutional world is shifting, how important is it to have the letters beyond the names and going through the institution of being named and labeled and identified as a psychologist if the fundamentals of what you're practicing and how to
Yeah.
engage and support people are not really taught?
Well, it's a really good question and one we've been asking for a long time. So I could argue both sides.
Mhm.
So I don't think that what people learn in graduate school ends up being of a great deal of value to them, other than, I said to you, I spent 7 years in graduate school.
Yes.
I spent 7 years being mentored and examined, having my work examined by other people. And when I wasn't doing good work, being challenged about the fact that I wasn't doing good work. And I had to
Mm.
start at the bottom doing testing and doing very simple, I wasn't allowed to see anybody in therapy for years. So I have served an apprenticeship
Right.
that somebody who did a 1 year master's degree didn't serve. And
Right.
that person may be brilliant and didn't need more training than that. So you
Yeah.
might end up getting a great therapist there. But we don't know as clearly if that's going to be the case because they haven't served, or they may, if they have, they didn't do it in school. They did it on their own.
Right.
So certainly if you wanted to see a counselor or a social worker who maybe didn't get the best training in graduate school, but has since then been very conscientious in pursuing their own therapy and their own training, then I think that person is then the equivalent of any doctorally trained person.
Right.
But did they do that?
Yes. Yeah. And I just find it so interesting because we've all confided in somebody, friend, partner, parent, mentor, whomever, rather than a paid psychologist or a therapist of some sort. We've all done it. I think it's human nature to be able to share in that way. But it also begs the question, what is that tipping point for individuals, do you think, or do you believe, for them to recognize that they need somebody more than the friend who always picks up the phone and has a friendly, yeah, has space for the other person to relieve and vent or air their concerns? What's that tipping point for the individual?
Um, First of all, it's not true that everybody has somebody they can find, and there are many people who don't.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair.
There are a sadly staggering number of people who don't, especially men.
Mm.
So first of all, not everyone, and I would say actually most people don't have someone they can find. And the difference between I like your question about when would one think that maybe professional help would be helpful.
Yeah.
I would say, if you keep talking to the friends again and again and again, and it doesn't seem like it's getting any better,
Yes.
that's probably a pretty good indication. One of the fundamental differences and friendships are an incredibly valuable part of life. The data is that people who have close friends live longer. So it's not just makes life happier, it makes life longer and healthier
Yes.
and all kinds of things. But friendships are by definition two-part. If you and I get together and have lunch, we'll probably spend some time with me talking to you about what's going on with me and you talking with me what's going on with you.
Mm-hmm.
When you go see a therapist, it's all about you.
That's right.
And so it's an incredible luxury. You don't have to worry if you're interesting to me. You don't have to worry if you're telling me the same story again. You don't have to worry if I'm bored because I'm just there to help you. And that's like getting a massage, where you're just like, all you have to do is lie there for an hour and be the recipient.
Yes.
And that's sort of an extraordinary thing, is to have an hour a week, every other week, or however often you go, that you take out of your life to devote and most of them we don't do that. We don't even take an hour to eat a meal.
Right.
We're
Very
doing three
true.
things at once. We don't ever sit down and just say, okay, I'm going to give myself an hour now.
Mm-hmm.
Go to therapy, you do that. You say, well, at least once every however often,
Right.
I am going to just pay attention to myself, and someone else is going to help me do that.
Have you seen the shift of social economic individuals who come to therapy now versus of what they did before?
Well, that's changed. There was a period of time where most health insurance covered therapy and had good coverage for therapy. And so, for example, I practiced for 40 years in Georgia, and the teachers in Georgia had great insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were a lot of teachers in therapy, which I have to think was better for everybody, because if the teachers are happier, the kids are happier, and they grow up to be happy. So that's a great idea to provide great insurance for teachers.
Yes.
Then we went through a period where managed care came in, and they made therapy very difficult for people to obtain, which is indefensible, because therapy is one of the few interventions. I think it's a 3-to-1 ratio. We've done studies where we know that if you spend $1,000 on therapy this year, your health insurance costs over the next decade will be $3,000 a year less. So insurance companies not paying for therapy is cost ineffective. It costs them more money if they don't pay for therapy.
Right.
So we went through that period with managed care, and now we seem to be coming out the other side with the Affordable Care Act saying, you can't rule out pre-existing conditions, and mental health coverage has to be the equivalent of physical health coverage. And so now we seem to be coming back and more public figures being willing to say, yes, I'm in therapy.
Right. The social acceptance of it.
Yes.
The validation and
Yes.
allowance of it, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
particularly men. I think it's been very important that some very public male figures have come out and said, yes, my wife and I went to therapy. It was very helpful, or I went to therapy, or I
Mhm.
think that's been a big deal.
Do you think that there's an end game, if you will, for the lack of better terms, for individuals to say, okay, we've done enough therapy, be it an individual or couples, I think we're good for now.
Yeah, my teacher used to always say that when people start talking about how much trouble it is to get there, or how expensive it is, or how hard it is to clear at the time, that obviously it's not as critical to you. So usually when
Right,
people start therapy, it's because something really bad happened.
right,
And
right.
so at first it's like, oh my God, so 4 more days to my next therapy appointment. I can't wait.
I
And
see.
then it becomes like, oh, I've got therapy today. I've got so much to do. And
Right.
then at that point, you realize that it's not as critical to you.
Yes.
It then has become more of like getting a massage. Like you're not going to not
Right.
function if you don't get a massage, but your week's going to go a lot better if you do.
True.
And so
Yes.
some people then leave because they've solved the immediate crisis that brought them. But some people stay because they feel like their lives are continuing to improve, or their relationships are better, or they're doing better at work, or they're better with their kids, or whatever matters to them. And
Mm,
as long as they keep getting benefit, they want to continue.
yeah. Or it's the flip side of that, of they're going through emotional challenges or something and they don't want to face it.
Mhm.
So therefore that becomes the first thing that goes on the chopping block of I need my time back.
Yeah, well, that's innately human. We are creatures of habit. Our nervous
Mhm.
systems are set up to preserve the status quo, not seek novel stimuli.
Right.
So
Right.
anytime you want to make change, there's going to be a resistance. It's astounding that, so for example, women who are in physically violent relationships
Right. Yes.
leave their relationships an average of 7 times before they stay gone.
That's
So you
right.
think like,
Yes.
why would you go back? But it's just human
Yeah.
to really seek familiarity and comfort, and it's hard to change, which is why there are therapists, because it is
Mm,
hard to
mm,
change.
mm. Yeah. Yeah. You talked about the the need, or should I say, the larger scale of men being in therapy, or perhaps seeking therapy for be it their emotional space, but I'm going to lean into the space of perhaps an element of loneliness, of lack of peer circle, because I think as women, we naturally gravitate towards circles and build community,
Yes.
perhaps a little bit easier than men. So, what has there been a shift in men, not only men coming to therapy, but more information, more insight, and more awareness for men to build
Yeah.
that community?
Well, you're speaking, of course, about a topic dear to my heart. I
Mhm.
just published a book about men, about called Hidden in Plain Sight, about men's fears of women in intimate relationships. And so
Right.
I have for many years had a practice in which I have more men than women. And most of the men in my practice started off never in a million years thinking they would ever be in therapy and never wanting to be in therapy. But then when they find out what therapy is like, they're very drawn to it and they get a lot from it. And so I've always advocated for teaching men more
Mhm.
about what the benefits of therapy are. And one of the articles I wrote for Psychology Today is called Men in Therapy, What's in It for You? And
Mhm.
it's just a list of some of the benefits that men typically don't know about, that might, so we tend to sort of shame men for not being interested in therapy, but we don't teach them about why they might be interested in therapy. And
Right.
the other thing you talked about was men and loneliness, which is an incredibly important topic.
Yes.
Loneliness is a bigger risk factor for mortality than smoking cigarettes. If you were trying
Yeah.
to take care of your health and live longer, you had to choose between smoking cigarettes or being lonely, you're better off smoking.
Wow.
Okay.
That's
So I wrote an article for Psychology Today about men and loneliness that has been read 1 million times,
Wow.
which is just stunning to me. I mean, when it published and it jumped to like hundreds of thousands of views in the first few days, I was like, oh my God. But I think it's because there are a lot of men out there who are functioning and, they're married and they're doing well
True.
at work and all that. But I always ask men when I work with them, do you have friends? And they always say yes. And then I say, well, no, wait a minute. By friends, I mean people you talk to the way you talk with me. And then they're
Right.
like, oh, no, no, I don't have those kind of
Mm.
friends.
Mm.
And most men don't. And maybe they talk to their partner, but if not, they really don't talk to anybody. And so all the things that you carry in your life that you just habitually would think to talk to somebody about year after year after year, they carry without talking
Sure.
to anybody about. And then they die 7 years before women, and we wonder why.
Yes. Yes. Is there a marker or is there some sort of sign for individuals in terms of men where they say yes, they have peers, yes, they have friends, but yes, they may talk to some of them or maybe be selective as to what they share and when they share it. So by your sentence of, but do you have these kind of conversations you would have with a therapist with their friends? Perhaps they would, but perhaps the issue that they are challenged with in an emotional state, that might not be aired until 6, 8 months, 9 months after the fact. How does that change not only the person, but the dynamic of that relationship?
See, I don't think 6 to 8 or 9 months is a long time.
Okay.
Um, I think that some of the really deeper secrets that we all hold, it could be decades before you talk with anybody. I've worked with people. I work with a man who was a minister. I worked with him for probably more than 15 years before he told me he was gay.
Mm.
And it's not that he was keeping a secret from me, it's that he wasn't ready to say out loud and hear himself and all of he was married. So,
Yes.
he's married and a minister in a church that forbid homosexuality. So it was a big
Yes.
deal. So
Absolutely.
it's not like those are not things that people just like, pop out with. And
Right. That,
because acknowledging that to himself changed his whole life. Once he said those words out loud, there's no going back. You can't hide anymore.
yes.
And
Yes.
so I have a friendship of over 50 years. We talk weekly. And there are things we're telling each other now we have never said to each other after
Mm.
50 years. But it
Mm.
just builds. We
Right.
have a long abiding trust and connection. And there are things we're talking about now that we've never talked about before. And it's
Is
wonderful.
that it is wonderful. Is that just peeling back the layers of your
Yeah.
own onion and being ready to
Yeah,
share it?
absolutely.
It
Absolutely.
is.
Well, I mean, because there's another factor here, which is aging,
That's
which
right.
is,
That's where that was the
you know,
second component of that.
he's a
Yeah,
little older than I am. And one of the nice things that happens with aging is you don't spend as much time worrying about what people think about you.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
So I'm more comfortable being myself, and that means I'm more comfortable telling him who I
Yeah.
am.
Yeah. Has that shifted the way you practice therapy with clients as well?
Yes. Yes. And
Mm.
it's made me a much more effective therapist. I've always said to
Mm.
students that the single thing that will make you a more effective therapist is having a full practice.
Right.
Because when your practice is full, you have as much work as you want. You don't worry about losing people. You don't worry about,
Right.
oh, I don't know if I should say that. And once your practice is full, you're like, okay, I'm just gonna say what I think would be most helpful. And if it does, if that's
It
not,
works.
and if it doesn't, then maybe they should see another therapist.
That's
But
right.
someone else will take their place, and I don't have to worry about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Ultimately. But
So the
it's
same as aging. I work now. I work about 1/3 time,
right.
and I work because I enjoy the work. I don't need to work,
Right.
and so that means every time I sit down with somebody, there it's very clear why I'm there. I'm there because I want to be there, not because it's my job and I have to. And I'm
Right.
there because I want to be. And if I didn't want to be, I wouldn't be.
Yeah. And that shifted the way you practice then, I guess,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. I find it interesting how you talk so much, be it in your articles and no doubt in your book as well, the relationship between men and women, because I'm sure majority of these conversations with your clients are coming in are talking about relationships with their spouses, their partners,
Mm.
specifically with individuals of the opposite sex, and perhaps how the influence of their past relationships, aware or unaware, conscious or unconscious, has influenced how they move forward in the world. What do you believe, or what have you seen been some of the bigger emotional blockages, for the lack of better terms, that men and women facing? Is it the same? Are they different?
I think they're different.
Mhm.
So for men, I think the biggest blockage is what I wrote about in the most recent book, which is how afraid we are of being abandoned by women, being not loved, not validated, not approved of by women. And for women, what I'm working on now, I'm working on a book about what women learn from their mothers about men.
Mhm.
And those lessons that mothers teach their daughters, which are communicated both verbally and through their
Right,
behavior towards
right.
their
Yep.
husbands, the woman's father, have an enormous influence on how women are then in their, if they're heterosexual, in their romantic relationships with men.
Right,
But it's a ghost.
right.
It's having an impact, but it's not recognized. So the couple is perplexed. Why does it keep going this way? But when you start talking to women about what they learn from their mother, it's very clear why it's going this way. And it really helps to break some of those repetitive patterns when you understand this is what my mother taught, but that's not really how I think about it. I don't really agree with what my mother taught me. I don't think that's true about men, and I don't want to keep behaving as if that were true.
Mhm. But somehow innately that is picked up and actioned
Sure.
out.
Early learning is the most powerful.
It
If you
is.
grow up and you watch your mom be sort of subtly condescending towards your father, which happens a lot,
Yeah,
and that she doesn't really expect him, if she asks him to do something, he'll do it, but she doesn't really expect him to be a partner and to really,
right.
if she says, "Will you pick the kids up from school today?" He'll do that. He's compliant, but he wouldn't say, "Who's getting the kids from school today?" So
Right.
then that's what you grew up with. And then you get married and you don't expect your husband to be a full
That's
partner
right.
with you. And you just think you have to tell him everything
That's
to do.
right.
And then, of course, he knows that that's what's expected of him. And so he doesn't grow his own capacity to be a full. And they're both stuck in a system that neither one of them likes or
Mhm.
wants,
Mhm.
but they're both playing out something from their families, but it's not them.
Yes. How do you shift that?
By starting right there and saying, well, so if we could set that aside, how would you like to be involved? So I have a great experiment for this particular example that we're
Mhm.
using.
Mhm.
So I always, with couples with young kids, I always tell the woman to go away for at least 3 days.
Mm.
And she's not allowed to make any meals in advance. She's not allowed to schedule any play dates. She's not allowed to hire a babysitter. And she's not allowed to check in by phone while she's gone.
Wow. Okay.
It's a transformative experience in most couples. So the men have been engaging in supervised parenting until that point.
Right. Yes.
And then when she's gone, they got to figure it out.
Yes.
I have a picture of me giving my first child his first bath. My wife had a cesarean, so she's bedridden. And I'm
Right.
giving him his first bath, holding the notes from the child rearing class, right?
Oh,
Because I'm a graduate student. I know how to take notes. Like, you don't need notes. I didn't believe that I knew how to get there's
yeah.
only one rule: don't drown them.
Yes.
That's the only,
That's
don't
right.
break them. So I was so not confident because I had younger sisters, but I never was involved in taking care of them
Mm.
at all, ever in any way. So it was the
Mm.
first time I'd ever bathed the child. So when the mom goes away for 3 days, the dads start to figure things out. And more importantly, they like it. They
Right.
like not being supervised. They like figuring out their own style and they'll do. So when the mom comes home, almost invariably, the kids have had a blast. The dad has loved it, and it is usually the man who initiates doing it again.
Mm.
Same thing about middle of the night stuff. I always tell men, be the one to get up in the middle of the night with your kids. Oh, I got morning, go to work. I know. You'll never regret it. You will have the most intimate time with your children imaginable, and
Right.
you will actually look forward to them getting up in the middle of the night
Mm.
because it's precious
That's right. Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Beautiful. Interesting experiment.
Check it out.
Yeah.
Recommend it to people. It is, I've never had it go wrong. And the moms are always, when they come back, it's first of all, more often than not, the couple has really good sex after that weekend
Mm.
because every woman wants their husband, every straight woman wants their husband to be close with their children. And they try to make it happen
Right.
instead of backing up and allowing it to happen. As long as they're trying to make it happen, it doesn't happen. It's terribly
Right.
painful for them, particularly if they weren't close to their father. And then
Sure.
they're watching their children grow up not close. So when they learn how to back up and they come home and they see even in a weekend, a different relationship, it is so heartwarming to them
Yeah.
that the couple usually has really good sex.
Yeah. I'm sure. Well,
Yeah.
it's also an element of union. I mean, as women,
We're a team.
we're in this space of building community and building
Yeah.
this family, if you will, for the lack
Yeah.
of better terms, even though it is, but really having it in
Yes.
succinct, having
Yeah.
it in flow and flow together. So it's important.
Yeah. Women feel most of the time like they are in it alone. Like their husbands
Mm.
might help, but all the responsibility sits with them. And when they leave for a weekend and see that everything got done, not the way they would do it,
Sure.
and the dishes are in the wrong place, and the kids ate hot dogs and all that, but
Yeah,
it all got done.
it did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting.
I
Yeah.
used to call those weekends beer and pizza weekend. I would tease my
There
wife.
you go.
Beer and pizza.
Well, like you said, as long as they're
Yeah,
fed,
we did have
washed,
pizza.
and bathed, I'm sure you did.
Well, I'm glad you said that because the other thing that happens, so I was talking about the impact on the women. The impact on the men is like, a lot of men are critical of moms and they don't think it's that hard a job because they ain't doing it.
That's
But
right.
when you do it by yourself for 3 days, you will never be critical of a woman again
Yes.
because you'll be exhausted.
Yes.
And then you're like, oh, okay. Like, I see what she's doing. I have a lot more respect. You have to do it
That's right. That's
to
right.
know
Yeah,
how hard it is.
it is. It is. And then naturally, I believe, look for efficiencies.
Yeah, of
So then I see it working more in tandem as a team.
course. Sure. I mean, in any company, you cross-train people in roles, right? You
That's
don't just have
right.
one person who does a job because then they get hit by a bus and you
That's
screwed.
right. That's
So
right.
yeah, absolutely. And nobody's happy doing the same job over and over and over
Yeah,
again.
exactly. Exactly.
So,
Coming out of this, switching a little bit here, coming out of this phase of COVID and
mhm.
this mass isolation that was granted across the entire globe, have there been other deeper and bigger emotional challenges that are showing up for people were different from pre-COVID that you're seeing now during therapy?
Yeah, I think the one that everybody is wrestling with, and we probably don't talk enough about, is the change in gender roles.
Mm.
So, rigid conformity is not healthy, but it's appealing to people because it simplifies things. So if you're a football fan, if they bring in a new quarterback, they write out the plays on a sheet on his arm. So he
Mm.
doesn't have to think about it. He just calls the plays. And so when we have rigid gender roles, women do this, men do this. It's
Right.
not healthy for men or women, but it's like having the plays on your sleeve. You know what you're supposed to do, you know what's expected of you. So
Right.
now we've blown all that up.
Hmm.
And I think women are doing better with this change because you've been at it longer, so
Hmm.
it's less that you've been through a lot more of the change. But men are really, really struggling because men are socialized to please women and seek
Right.
approval from women. And now it is not clear to them at all what the hell they're supposed to do to
Mm.
make you happy. And
Mm.
so men are in a lot of distress. There's actually a wonderful researcher who wrote the foreword to my book, whose name just left my mind, but I'll think of it.
Hmm.
Uh, who has researched what he calls gender role conflict, which is the how, if this is what traditional men are supposed to be, how different you are from that is gender
Hmm.
role conflict. And the more gender role conflict you have, the more physical illness you have, the more depression, the more anxiety, the more relationship conflict. It's very, we can measure the ways in which these changing gender role expectations are hurting men. Now, we're going to come out in a better place with this, but the transition and the confusion, particularly for young men,
Hmm.
I think is causing them a lot of distress.
What would be one or two antidotes for that, for these young men?
The antidote that I've learned in the last decade is men talking to other men. So I do therapy groups for men only, and it has been an amazing experience to me to hear the intimate ways that men talk with each other when given the opportunity to do so, which women always, when I say this, look at me like, no, you're wrong. That doesn't
Mm.
happen. I'm like, yeah, it does. And I have been doing groups for 50 years, and groups with men are the only groups I've ever done where the participants in the group openly talk about loving each other, which is
Mm.
not what you would expect, but
Right.
happens on a regular basis in the groups that I do with men. And so the answer is fellowship. The answer is
Yeah.
our lift the term from 12 steps.
Yeah.
The answer is men being given opportunities. And there's a lovely chapter in the book in which I invite men to form book groups,
Right.
to get together with other men, read the book together, and use it as a sort of launching to have those kind of more open personal conversations with each other.
Hmm. Somewhat mimicking in practices that women perhaps have formed over the years too.
Yes, absolutely, which men typically have not.
Yes.
So men get together and do activities together, but there's often not of. I remember when I taught my son how to play golf and then he got lost interest. I said, why don't you like it? He said, we don't talk. We just go from one hole to the next. We never talk.
Mm.
Okay. I raised him right.
That's valid. Yeah, it's great. Beautiful. So what's next for you? You shared that you're writing another book.
Yeah, I have not made a decision whether writing a book is an enormous undertaking. And so right now I'm meeting with two women colleagues who I recruited for this. And we're just having a lot of fun learning about the topic, whether or not I carry through and make that a book. But if there are any women listening to your show, I am interviewing women on the question of what did you learn from your mother about men? And so I
Mm.
assume you'll put out my email in the show notes.
Absolutely. Yes.
So anyone who's interested in being interviewed can get in touch with me. And also my website will be there and everything that I
Yes.
write ends up and you can join if you go to the website, you can join the mailing list
Right.
and you'll get a copy of. But I write regularly.
Right.
Um, I keep I write at least something at least once a month. And my last article was about why there's no such thing as the perfect gift. So I cover a pretty wide range of,
Yes. Topics.
but it's nice. I mean, it's nice to be in a place where I can sort of pursue my own interests and read
Yes.
what I want to learn about. And
Beautiful. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, all your details will be in the show notes. I
great.
appreciate you sharing
My
and
pleasure.
doing the work that you do, be it for the for the majority of your career, but also as you pursue forward. And feeding your own curiosity and interest to
You know,
empower men and women to be in a better place. So,
we're in an age where people have such dire predictions about global warming and this and the loss of democracy and all that stuff is true and real. But maybe the one good thing that's happening is that older people are living longer and staying mentally sharp longer. And so maybe there'll be more wisdom in the world. Maybe as our elders live longer, maybe there'll be more wisdom in the world.
perhaps, yeah, perhaps. Well, we can only hope for that.
Yep.
So, yeah. I appreciate your sharings,
My
your
pleasure.
experiences, and the time that you've had with me on the call. So thank you so much.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
I'm Naranjan, and you've been listening to Master of Your Crafts podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review, and join me next week for another episode. Thank you for listening.